not speaking tonight. Personally, I'm done. No more sermons. That's it. So we have a very special, it's not a guest, but just a special speaker tonight. I'm so excited to have Shayna sharing tonight. No, just sit down for a minute. I'll just introduce you. She is eager. She is super eager to get up here and talk. I know. She's like, seriously, every week she's like, Dan, would you stop? I want to talk. So I just want to just say I'm just so, I don't know, inspired by what God is doing in Shayna's life. It's been incredible. As you know, Shayna came to our church in this space years ago at a personal just pain in her life. God led her to our church, and the journey she's been on, just following God's calling in her life. This is one courageous woman here, following God, changing careers, following God wherever he might lead, and now just completed her first year at Princeton Theological Seminary towards a Master's of Divinity. Just incredible. We've got one of her classmates in the back here. Excited. Is it James? Would you stand? Because I want to introduce James as well. Is it James? And you'll see a lot more of James. James is going to be interning with us for the summer, so we'll get to see more of James. You'll get to hear James up here. He's a little nervous for that, but it's going to be good. So please make sure you welcome James after service. But thrilled to have him here, another student at the seminary. But God's just been doing some incredible things in Shayna and continues to, and I just have no idea where it's going to go. I'm very curious to see what God does in and through Shayna. But she's a blessing to our church. She's such a huge part of who we are, and I know God's put a word on her heart for us tonight. And so I just encourage you all, turn the ears on, turn the heart on. Let's listen to whatever God's put on her heart. Shayna, would you come and share?
Stand. Woo. I see the music here, and I'm like, no, I'm not singing. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, guys. So we are actually, if this is your first time here, we are on a series called Shipwrecked Faith, and we're on week 4. And so the verse that we're looking at comes from 1 Timothy 1:19, which states that, "Cling your faith to Christ and keep your conscience clear. For some have deliberately violated their conscience, and as a result, their faith has been shipwrecked." So this series has basically been saying that as we've been building our faith, there's times that if we build it on rocky ground, we can end up crashing. And when that happens, we can try to look back, and there's ways that we can try to find a way to rebuild. So just a super quick recap. Week 1, we had Dan preaching, saying that God's given us a compass, and that's our conscience, and we can know what is right because of that. Week 2 is that not to miss the point, that the point is to love people. And week 3, Dan preached about that when we think we know better, God knows exactly what he's doing. And so this week, what I'm really excited to share about with you is that we're going to be exploring what it means to be shipwrecked when we get distracted by the everyday in life and we forget why we're here and why it's so important to share our stories. So one of the verses we're going to be looking at is from 2 Timothy 2:4, which says, "Soldiers don't get tied up in the affairs of civilian life, for then they can't please the officer who enlisted them." And you're probably like, oh, okay, might not have heard that verse before. But it really talks about how that in the everyday, we can get really distracted over things that we think are really important, and we forget what's really at stake. And it was reminding me, actually, when I first started working at the hospital. 2 years ago, I started working as a hospital chaplain at Penn Medicine Princeton, and I thought, like, as a chaplain, bringing faith into the hospital, like, I'm not going to get distracted. Like, I'm going to focus on God and be with people. But I found really quickly that what you expect or what you think is going to happen is, never happens. Or, for example, I'll tell you the first time I heard a fire drill at the hospital. I was walking the halls, and the fire alarm started going off, and I was like, oh my gosh, guys, there's a fire. And they're like, yes. I'm like, should we, do something? And they're like, are you new here? I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it's not a big deal. And the nurse says to me, no, if we actually see flames, then we close the door. And I was like, oh, okay. So it was just, it was really eye-opening for me to go in and see how different things were. And sometimes I ended up really getting tied up into things that I never, expected to, and getting distracted. Like mediating disputes between employees, or like working out like vaccine records and all of those things. And there's times that in the middle of it, I felt really discouraged. And when you feel that way, it can lead to shipwreck, where you're wondering, like, what am I doing here? Like what's happening? Am I really like doing what God wants me to do? Because I was just getting tied up in the everyday. And so one day I was feeling this way particularly a lot, and I had a lot of patients to see. And there was a man who I had to see before the end of the day, and I'm already really tired. I have a lot going on, but I stop in his room, and I sit down and tell myself, like, okay, I'm going to listen to him and see what he has to say. And so he's a man in his 40s, and he had just been diagnosed with a lot of heart issues, serious heart issues. And so he tells me that's not even the hardest part of what's going on for him at the hospital, that his wife had just gotten diagnosed with stage 3 cancer the year before. And through that trauma, it's been especially difficult because they have a 14-year-old at home who's going through online schooling, going through a lot of trouble. And he tells me that his fear is that both of them are going to get so ill that they're going to leave their child behind without parents. And we start talking about, like, what do we do when we feel like so discouraged and so upset? And then he says, I want to tell you this thing that happened to me a couple months ago. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. He said he was bringing his wife to the hospital, and he was already so exhausted from the treatments and things that were happening, and she was feeling the effects of chemo. So they're driving to the hospital, and it's at Robert Wood Johnson, New Brunswick, which is this huge hospital, crazy parking, and he's having trouble getting a parking space, and it's really, really far away from the hospital entrance doors. And he tells me in this moment he's getting out of the car, and he just feels like the weight of exhaustion, and the entrance is far away, and he has to help carry his wife to the door. And he doesn't even know how he's going to get there, what's going to happen, and he just feels despair. And then he says, out of nowhere, a man comes with a wheelchair running over to us. Didn't even know me, know my wife, and he came over and he helped put my wife in the chair, and I was able to lean on the chair, and he helped carry us into the hospital. And in that moment, we both looked at each other, and he said, that's how I knew God was real, because God carried us when we couldn't even carry ourselves anymore. And I remember walking out the door and thinking, why am I getting so tangled up in all of these everyday things? And I could have missed a story like that, and how incredible that was, and how God just worked in this person's life, like this man's truth. And I think what was so amazing about it is that stuff like that doesn't just happen here and now, but there's times where we might forget to miss the truth, and that stuff happens even in the Bible. And so I wanted to share a word with you today from John 9, the book of John, and talk a little bit about how it relates. And so it's a story of Jesus healing the blind man. And if you've never heard it before, that's okay. As Dan said, I came here 7 years ago, and I didn't know the story. I'd never read the Bible before in my life. And so if you've never heard it, like, that's okay, because I think this story is so, stands on its own and just tells a truth that is really incredible. So if you want to read along with me, it's also going to be on the screen. We're going to read John 9, verse 1 to 25. So as Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. When I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. So after saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging said, "Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said he was. Some said, "No, but he looks like him." But he himself said, "I'm that man." "How were your eyes open?" they said. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and washed. I went and washed, and I could see." "Where's this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who'd been blind. And the day on which Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes was the Sabbath. So the Pharisees asked him how he received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied. "I washed, and now I see." And the Pharisees said, "This man's not from God. He does not keep the Sabbath." And then others asked, "Well, how could a sinner perform signs?" And they were divided. Then they turned to the blind man and said, "What have you to say about him? It's your eyes he opened." The man said, "He's a prophet." They still didn't believe he'd been blind and received his sight until they sent for his parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it now he can see?" "We know he's our son. We know he was born blind, but he can see now. He opened his eyes. We don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He speaks for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the leaders who had decided anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That's why his parents said, "He's of age. Ask him." Now, a second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know, I was blind, and now I see." And I know that was a little bit long, but I wanted to dive into this because you see this man being healed, and it's pretty obvious he's being healed. He's telling the Pharisees, like, again and again. But verse 16 says they've got a deep division of opinion around them. Like, they keep fighting. And it's because these Pharisees, who are really into laws and they're keeping order with the temple, they're so focused on the law and the prophets and all of that stuff. They're so focused on the affairs of everyday life, civilian life, that they're not really seeing what's right in front of them. And I find that really sad because they're supposed to be men of God, and yet they are the ones tied up, and they are not seeing what's happening. And what's really interesting is that they yell at him at the end, and they say, "Give glory to God," which also translated means tell the truth. And he does tell the truth. He doesn't try to rationalize it. He doesn't try to explain it. He doesn't say, "Well, I was, blind for this many years. This is what I've been going through. Scientifically, it's impossible." He just simply states a fact, and he lets it sit on its own. Because he says, "I was blind, and now I see." And what I love about that story is that I don't think that's a story just for the Bible, that it's just for something that's in our time. He just simply tells the truth. And I believe that every person here has a truth in their life that can't be explained, like this man. Like, there's something, whether you've never believed or you have believed and you've been shipwrecked, there's some things in your life that just can't be explained. Not by science, not by rationalize it. There's just things that there's no explanation. It just is. And maybe you've never shared it with anybody, because maybe it would sound kind of weird. Or maybe you're worried how it might be interpreted or seen. Maybe you're worried that people might not take you seriously if you say something like that, like, this happened to me, and maybe they might think that you're crazy. Or maybe it's the opposite, and that, it's this truth, but you want to present it in a way to somebody that you wanted to say it just the right way, like the perfect way, the right way, and you worry that it might get messed up if you don't say it just the way it should be. And so when we think about these truths in our lives that we don't understand, we can't explain, there's a simple way that we can rebuild our faith when we're shipwrecked. And it's to tell the truth, like the man. You see, you don't have to have all the answers to tell the truth. You don't have to know everything to say what happened. You'll never violate your conscience and face shipwreck if you tell the truth. You might face rejection. I mean, it does happen in this story. Like, the guys are yelling at him, right? But this man didn't know that thousands of years later, we would be looking at this story and we would be drawing inspiration from it years later. He didn't know that. He decided to be courageous and tell the truth. And God's glory shined through it. He didn't have to do any extra legwork. And maybe there's times we've felt shipwrecked in faith when we don't understand, like, we're struggling, we're getting caught up in the affairs of civilian life, and we feel like we don't have time for stuff. We don't have time to tell the truth. We don't have time to sit down and talk with people. But I have to tell you, one of the best ways to rebuild is to also take time to listen to truth in the stories of others. Right now, our church is doing a series called Starting Point. I did Starting Point about 6 years ago, and it's a special group where people take time out of their week and they take a few hours and they learn about faith, and they also decide to share their stories with each other. And I'm telling you, when you come together in a group like that, it will anchor you really quick when you're really, really struggling. When you hear truths in other people's lives, and we take time to do that. A group like that helped me to eventually launch a group called Sequoias. Sequoias, we started 6 years ago, and it was like Starting Point, which was about talking about faith and also talking about just sharing stories. But it also specifically focused on grief. And grief is another way that you can get shipwrecked really easily. And so we decided to get together and share our stories. We took the time out of our schedule every week, and we shared stories of pain and heartbreak. But there was also just glory in those moments of just hearing God work in amazing ways through people. We could have done something else. We could have filled that time with, going to kids' games or doing all that stuff. But we made the decision to come together, and it changed our lives. And I know I can come up here and I can tell you this. I can say, oh, you guys should join a group. You guys should, not focus on the everyday. You should, not, really, focus on God, all of that stuff. And it sounds really, really easy to say. But I wanted to do something a little bit different tonight. And I want to demonstrate for you guys what that actually looks like. See, church is like a large group. It's a communal gathering. And I want to share with you, just like that man in John 9, what it's like when someone has the courage to get up and just share the truth. And not that you have to have all the answers, Not that you have to have everything figured out, but just that when you get up and share something like that, God's glory just shines through. And so, even if you don't have all the answers tonight and you're needing to hear a truth, I'm so glad you're here. Because I have one of my friends from Sequoias who I talked to and I asked if she'd be willing to share the truth of how God has worked in her own life and the miracle that she's experienced. And I'd like to ask my friend Samaya to come up and speak. I can stay up with you.
Thank you, Shayna, for inviting me. Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Oops. Oh, okay. All right. Maybe I'll hold it. So, hi, everyone. All right. So when I met Shayna, this was, again, as mentioned, at the Sequoias, I was grieving. I was very sad. I was really trying. Okay, I'm so sorry. I was trying not to cry, but I think I'm going to have to cry all throughout, and I'm really sorry about that. So when I met Shayna, I was grieving. I was very sad. I was actually trying to come to terms with the fact that I would never experience motherhood. And I had no hope. I was hopeless. It felt, life had no meaning for me. You see, my husband and I, we had been trying at that point for almost 8 or 9 years to have a baby. And we did, the natural way. Then I went through the IUI process and then the IVF process, which, again, we were lucky because we had a good insurance, so we were able to do the IVF. And I thought at that point, IVF, great. I mean, you see all the stories about octomoms. I was dreaming that I'm going to have triplets and I'm going to have all these babies. I was so excited. So we went to an IVF clinic, and the first time we tried it, it was great. The doc, we're lucky. We actually had 5 great embryos that got. I don't know if you know how much about the IVF process. It's a process. So we were able to get 5 embryos, which was great, and the doctors were very excited. They said that apparently 3 of them looked great. That they were very excited for us. While the other 2, they were like, yeah, that's they're not so hot looking, but that's still good enough. We'll put them in ice or in cryo for later use. So again, we went there with very, very excited about the process. And then here we are. So I said, oh, great, I might even have triplets. You never know. So unfortunately, the IVF did not work. I did not even get pregnant. So I said, okay, all right. We tried again, and it didn't happen again. So at that point, we said, all right, let's just change the clinic. Perhaps it's just the clinic. We need not some other place. So we were able to change the clinic. Again, very lucky to have good insurance. So went to the second clinic, and again, so that was actually a great success. We were very excited. We were very happy. And in the first try, we ended up having, I got pregnant. So I was super psyched. And then as the weeks went by, we went to the doctor office. We heard the heartbeat. And both my husband and I were overjoyed. We said, finally, after trying for so long, so many years, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And we heard, and then we were waiting for the next time we went to go check the heartbeat. That's what I'd count the days. Then went to the doctor again, and we heard the heartbeat. We were so excited, so happy. But at that time, we noticed that the doctor did not look as happy. She had a concern on her face. So we said, okay, what's going on? And the doctor said that apparently the heartbeat was slowing down. She said, we still have hope. Let's just see what happens. So it was not a very, obviously good news, but we were still hopeful. We said, okay, let's see the next time what happens. But of course, the next time we went, the heartbeat had stopped. And I was devastated. We were devastated. But then we decided to still keep going. I had to, it was a girl. It was going to be a girl. But anyway, but we wanted to keep going. We said, okay, let's try one more time. So we did. We went again, and it worked again. Unfortunately, again, that time, um, it was early on, and I became very, very, I became very sick. And at that time, my husband, I was not feeling well, but my husband had, but at that time, my mother-in-law was moving from, my in-laws were moving from Indiana to Maryland, and I told my husband to please go and help them, even though he was concerned, but he still, but I was alone at home, and then they had to rush me to the hospital. And so I ended up in the hospital, and I lost the baby again. And after that, I said, I'm done. I just could not deal with the heartache. I could not, that feeling of hope and the IVF, again, going through the doctor every other day, being injected and going, and then the feeling of hope, this happiness that you feel when you're pregnant, and then the sadness, the depression. I just couldn't do it. I was done. So that was really the time I met Shayna by chance. And it was really, I was sad, I was broken, I was angry, I was devastated. And most importantly, I guess as a woman, you feel that you are not enough, and you just don't know how to explain that sadness to anybody. In paper, I looked happy. I have a great husband, and he was so supportive. But inside, I was hollow. I didn't have anything. But that was when happened to meet a friend of mine from work, have introduced me to LifeTree. And I actually had the first conversation with Pastor Dan, and he listened to me, and he said, you know what, I think I know who you can talk to. And that's how I met Shayna, and and went to this group. And Shayna said, perhaps if you listen, and she understood everything because she herself had gone through similar trauma. And she said, perhaps if you listen to other people's grief, you might be able to, and share, you might be able to heal. So those groups were amazing. I did end up talking, I did share, and that did put things in perspective. But however, more than that, it was also where I met my other friend, Katie. And the three of us, Shayna, myself, Katie, we became really good friends. And over the years, we healed each other. We were all going through our different set of trauma, and we talked. We meet up. We had supported each other, and over time, and I was okay. I felt that I was still sad, but I was okay. I had friends who supported me. I had friends who prayed for me. I had friends who believed in me, and had a husband who was very caring. So I think I was okay at that point. But of course, life has different ways of working out. When you think you're doing well, you're fine, everything's okay. We got news. This is 4 years ago. We heard the news that my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, who's also had trouble with pregnancy and conceiving, she called us and said they were having a baby. She was older than me. Of course, we were overjoyed to hear of her news, but we were also very sad because that brought back all the memories. At least before we thought we had some company, maybe misery loves company, but after that we felt alone. We looked at each other, my husband and I, we looked at each other because everybody around us were having babies. We had so many children, and we felt left out. We could not experience the joy of parenthood, and that made us very sad. And we were alone. We felt alone. And at that point, my husband said, but at the same time, it gave us hope because my sister-in-law was actually a couple of years older than me. Because the problem with I was just getting old, and the doctors didn't give me much chance. They said, we just don't have much chance of being, getting pregnant. But her news gave me hope. But at the same time, when I was all ready, said, okay, am I ready to do this again? Am I ready to go through the heartache again? When as soon as I decided, I said, perhaps we'll try one more time. Again, life slaps at you, and the insurance, I was aged out, so the insurance would not cover us anymore. I was too old. And we didn't have $30,000 to pop out to say, okay, we're gonna have another, on a chance that there's maybe a 1% chance for us to have a baby. So what do we do? And that's when I remember the B team, we had those 2 embryos that we had saved. At that point, the first clinic that I went to had gone bankrupt. So they actually had shipped our embryos, God knows, to this middle of nowhere 2 hours away, this small town, and we had no idea where it was. So after a little bit of trying to figure things out, we did have those 2 embryos. But to be honest, I didn't have much hope. I mean, the A team didn't work, so what could the B team do? And I was old. I was much older. So, but more than that, I just wasn't ready. I was not ready to go through all that emotion because I remember the trauma. I remember the trauma that I went through, how it impacted me, how I impacted the depression that I went through. I don't know if just wasn't ready for it. And it took me another year and a half to really come to say, okay, this is my last chance, because if this doesn't happen, again, I will have to go through that healing process again. But this time it was a little different because I did have friends. I had a lot of support. Not that I didn't have support before, but it was a different sort of support. I had gone through the process of healing. So it gave me some courage. It gave me some hope. So despite all of that, I said, okay, let's just do this. Now, the day we had to go pick up our embryos, I remember that very well, because it took us, we spent 8 hours really driving up and down, because we had to go pick up this container that looks like Star Wars R2-D2, and so that we could transfer the embryo from that other location that was 2 hours away, and then put the embryo in, to do the transfer, and bring it back in time to the first clinic, so that everything had to be done before 3 o'clock. So it was a lot of 8 hours of driving, back and forth, up and down New Jersey. But then again, so we did that. And it was, I don't know how it happened, but it was a success. I did get pregnant. But at the same time, I didn't want to get attached, because that pregnancy also was very rough. Every other week there was some crisis, and every day I would live through that trauma of being hopeful and then very, very sad and depressed, thinking that I've lost a baby. Every week there was something going on, whether it was, I don't want to go too much, but there was some crisis, and then I would run to the doctor. My husband would take me to the doctor, and I would hear the heartbeat, and that was the only time I'd be like, okay, the baby's okay. And we did not want to get attached. I did not want to think of this baby, because I said, I don't want to go through this trauma again. But slowly the weeks went, and then we hit the 20-week mark. And we did finally go to get the ultrasound done. And then we saw the baby's nose, and the hands, and the little feet. And then at that point, my husband and I, we decided, you know what, maybe this may not work out, because it was a high-risk pregnancy for me. So there was always risk. But when we made the choice, we said, yes, we don't want to get attached to the baby, that's fine, but maybe let's be happy. Let's try to be happy, even if it doesn't work out. Let's just enjoy, even if it's for a few weeks, because every week was a risk, and there was risk involved in every step of the way. So we did not know if it was going to work out. But then at that point, we said, maybe we choose to be happy. And then slowly the weeks went by, and then she finally arrived. It was April 15, 2020. I finally was able to hold my miracle baby, and we named her Ifra. And Ifra, to me, it means, one meaning is actually somebody that brings happiness, but the other meaning that we really like is someone who fixes. And my Ifra fixed me, because she has given me hope, and she has given me a lot of faith. And she came right in the beginning of pandemic. And the past 2 years has been extremely difficult, to say the least. COVID has taken a lot of my family members, thankfully not immediate, but a lot of my relatives. We had a lot of sickness, cancer, and then we had a lot of emotional trauma, financial trauma. This past 2 years have been horrendous. I'm sure with a lot of people can attest to that. But the one thing keeps me going is every time I look at her, I just think of her, and I think of the miracle that she is. To be honest, I'm still angry. Sometimes I still look at the world and I get angry and I feel hopeless. I go through my ups and downs, but that's okay. I haven't figured everything out. I haven't figured out my faith. But when I see her, I just cannot believe that she's in my arms and she's there and she's just there, and I just cannot believe it. So that's my story, and I really want to thank you guys for letting me share.
Thank you, Samaya. What's also, thank you so much, Samaya, for sharing that. I wanted to tell you, too, that through that journey, Katie, Samaya, and I were meeting for dinners. And when Samaya was going through that process, Katie told her that she wrote on a sticky note and put it on her bed every day that God would give her a miracle child. And she prayed that prayer every day for years. And we're giving her the sticky note back tonight to show her that, that we've seen miracles happen. And so I remember seeing baby Ifra a few weeks ago, opening the car door and having her say, "Mommy." And I remember the pain and the sorrow and the heartbreak that she had gone through. And when I heard her say, "Mommy," I think sometimes a story like that just stands on its own as a testimony of faithfulness, of glory in darkness, just like the man who needed the wheelchair, or the man who's blind and now sees, or the time when we say, "I don't know if I can get pregnant," and then it happens. Or even me, dead in my sins 7 years ago, and alive today in Christ. It stands on its own when we tell truths like that. And so tonight, you've witnessed the presence of somebody who's been bold enough to go in front of the congregation and say, "Might not have everything figured out, don't understand it all, but here's the truth. This is the truth." And we've also taken the time tonight to disentangle ourselves from civilian affairs and listen. And so today, I wonder if we can make the commitment to also do that this week. If we can say, "You know what? There's a truth in my life that I need to share. I might not know how to say it correctly. I might not know how it's going to be interpreted, but I'm going to be brave enough, and I'm going to share it." And I also pray that this week, that we would take the time, make the decision to disentangle ourselves and sit like we did tonight and hear God's truth in others. It's moments like that when we feel shipwrecked, when we feel like we don't understand, we're feeling like faith is hard and things like that. It's stories, God's story, the stories that we have, the stories that you have when we share with each other, that anchors us in a way that nothing else will. I pray that tonight we would do that. You've heard tonight what we can do. I charge for you guys to go and do the same.